The sun hung bright in the clear blue sky as Officer James Mercer guided his police cruiser through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge Heights. The neighborhood was known for its large homes with perfect lawns, a place where people felt safe leaving their garage doors open, and kids played freely in the streets. Mercer had patrolled this beat for 8 years now, and he took pride in keeping it that way, peaceful, orderly, and in his mind, exclusive. The radio crackled with routine updates, but the afternoon had been slow. Mercer sipped his coffee, scanning the streets with practiced eyes. His gaze landed on a figure standing on the sidewalk, in front of one of the neighborhood's most expensive homes, a colonial-style house with a for sale sign planted in the manicured front lawn. The man was black, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in pressed khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt. He held what looked like papers in his hand, glancing between them and the house. Something about this scene made Mercer sit up straighter in his seat. He slowed the cruiser. "Dispatch, I'm checking out a suspicious individual on Maple Drive," he said into his radio, not waiting for a response before pulling to the curb. The man on the sidewalk was Colonel Thomas Wilson, though Mercer didn't know this yet. Wilson had arrived in town just 3 days ago, recently transferred to lead the nearby Fort Harrison military base. After 20 years of moving his few possessions from one barracks to another, from one war zone to the next, he was finally looking to buy his first real home. Wilson studied the realtor's information sheet in his hands. The house seemed perfect. 4 bedrooms, a study where he could display his medals and commendations, and most importantly, space for his elderly mother to live with him. His realtor was running late but had texted permission for him to take a preliminary look from the outside. As Wilson walked up the stone path toward the front porch, he didn't notice the police cruiser pull up or hear the door open and close. He was lost in thought, imagining Sunday dinners in the spacious dining room he could see through the window. "Hey, what are you doing there?" Mercer's voice cut through Wilson's thoughts. Wilson turned, surprised but not alarmed. He was used to being approached by strangers. It came with the uniform, though today he wasn't wearing one. "Good afternoon, officer," Wilson said with a friendly nod. "I'm just looking at this house. I'm thinking of buying it." Mercer approached slowly, his right hand resting near his holster, a detail that didn't escape Wilson's notice. The officer's eyes narrowed as he looked Wilson up and down. "This is private property," Mercer said. "Do you have permission to be here?" Wilson held up the realtor's sheet. "Yes, sir. My realtor is on her way to show me the inside. She said I could take a look around the outside while I wait." Mercer didn't reach for the paper. Instead, he looked past Wilson to the house, then back at him with clear skepticism in his eyes. "We've had reports of break-ins in this area." Wilson nodded patiently. "I understand. I can wait on the sidewalk if that's better." "I'm going to need to see some ID," Mercer said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "Of course." Wilson reached toward his back pocket. "Moving slowly and deliberately, hands where I can see them." Mercer's voice sharpened instantly, his hand now gripping his holster. Wilson froze, then very slowly raised his hands to shoulder height. "My wallet is in my back pocket, officer." "I was just reaching for my ID as you requested. Turn around. Hands on your head." Mercer's voice had taken on the hard edge he used when he felt a situation might escalate. Wilson complied without argument, though confusion and the first flickers of anger began to rise within him. He'd faced danger in war zones across the world, led hundreds of troops into battle, and received the highest commendations for his service. Yet here, in this peaceful American neighborhood where he hoped to make a home, he was being treated like a criminal. "Officer, there seems to be a misunderstanding," Wilson said calmly as Mercer patted him down. "No misunderstanding. You're on private property without the owner's permission. As I explained, my realtor—" "Save it." Mercer cut him off, pulling Wilson's wallet from his pocket. He flipped it open, barely glancing at the driver's license before pocketing it. "We're going to sort this out down at the station." A silver car pulled up to the curb and a woman in a business suit stepped out, looking confused at the scene before her. It was Lisa Chen, Wilson's realtor, finally arriving for their appointment. "What's going on?" she called, hurrying toward them. "Colonel Wilson? Is everything okay?" Mercer turned toward her, keeping one hand firmly on Wilson's arm. "You know this man?" "Of course I do. He's my client. We have an appointment to view this house." Lisa looked from Mercer to Wilson, clearly alarmed. "Colonel, what happened?" The word colonel didn't seem to register with Mercer, who was now glancing between Lisa and Wilson with growing uncertainty. Wilson remained calm, his hand still on his head as instructed. "Ma'am, step back, please," Mercer ordered. "This man was trespassing on private property." Lisa's face flushed with anger. "He was not trespassing. I told him to meet me here. I'm the listing agent for this property, and he is a serious buyer with an appointment." She reached into her purse and pulled out business cards, offering one to Mercer. "I can prove it, and you need to take your hands off my client right now." Mercer hesitated, then slowly released his grip on Wilson's arm. "I still need to verify his identity." "Then give him back his wallet and let him show you his ID properly," Lisa said firmly. Reluctantly, Mercer handed the wallet back to Wilson, who calmly opened it and presented his driver's license alongside a military ID card that clearly displayed his rank and position. Mercer's expression changed slightly as he looked at the military ID, but he didn't apologize. Instead, he said gruffly, "There have been reports of suspicious activity in the area. I was just doing my job." Wilson straightened his shirt where Mercer's grip had wrinkled it. "I understand you have a job to do, officer, but perhaps you could approach situations like this differently in the future." "Is there anything else, Officer Mercer?" Lisa asked pointedly, reading the name from his badge. Mercer looked uncomfortable now, caught between backing down and saving face. "No, ma'am. You folks have a good day." He turned and walked back to his cruiser without another word. As Mercer drove away, Lisa turned to Wilson with an expression of horror and embarrassment. "Colonel Wilson, I am so sorry about that. That was completely unacceptable." Wilson watched the police car disappear around a corner before responding. "Unfortunately, it's not uncommon. But let's not let it ruin the showing. This house looks promising." Lisa hesitated, her keyring dangling from her fingers. "Are you sure you want to continue?" "We could reschedule." "I'm sure," Wilson said firmly. "I've faced worse than Officer Mercer." "Much worse," he managed a small smile. "Besides, I really liked the look of that study through the window." As they walked up to the front door, Wilson maintained his dignified composure, but inside familiar feelings churned. Frustration, weariness, and a resigned anger. He had hoped things might be different in this town, but it seemed some experiences followed him regardless of his uniform, his rank, or his service. Inside the house, Wilson moved from room to room, listening to Lisa's enthusiastic descriptions of hardwood floors and crown molding. But part of his mind remained outside with Mercer, replaying the interaction and wondering what might have happened if Lisa hadn't arrived when she did. The kitchen was spacious and modern, with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Wilson ran his hand along the smooth surface, thinking of his mother's cooking and how she'd love this space. "The backyard is beautiful too," Lisa said, leading him toward French doors that opened onto a patio. "There's plenty of room for entertaining, and the previous owners installed a fire pit over there." Wilson nodded, making appropriate comments, but his enthusiasm for the house had dimmed. Would neighbors call the police if they saw him grilling in that backyard? Would kids playing nearby be hurried away by watchful parents? Would he forever be seen as an intruder in his own neighborhood? As they completed the tour and stepped back outside, Wilson noticed a neighbor watching from across the street, phone in hand. The man quickly looked away when Wilson met his gaze. "What do you think?" Lisa asked, locking the front door. "It's within your price range, and the sellers are motivated." Wilson took a deep breath of the fresh air, looking up at the house that could be his home. It was beautiful, perfect even. But today's incident had cast a shadow over it. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "It has a lot of what I'm looking for, but I want to see the other properties we discussed too." Lisa nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course. We have 2 more appointments this week." As they walked to their cars, Wilson spotted Officer Mercer's cruiser passing slowly by on the cross street. Their eyes met briefly before Mercer drove on. Wilson got into his car, placed his hands on the steering wheel, and sat there for a moment, gathering himself. 20 years of service, countless medals, and the responsibility of commanding an entire military base. None of it had mattered in those tense moments with Mercer. In the officer's eyes, he had seen only one thing, a threat that didn't belong. Wilson started his car and followed Lisa out of the neighborhood. He would find a house somewhere in this town. He would make it his home. And somehow he would find a way to change things. not just for himself but for everyone who had ever been misjudged based on the color of their skin. The encounter with Officer Mercer wasn't over. In fact, Wilson thought as he drove toward the base, it was just beginning. 3 days after the incident at the house, Colonel Thomas Wilson sat in his temporary office at Fort Harrison, reviewing personnel files. The room was sparse, just a desk, computer, and a few boxes he hadn't unpacked yet. A single framed photo of his mother stood beside his laptop. The base would be his responsibility for the next 3 years, and he wanted to understand every aspect of its operations as quickly as possible. A knock on the door interrupted his concentration. "Come in," Wilson called, looking up from his work. Lieutenant Rivera entered, standing at attention. "Sir, there's a situation in town I think you should know about." Wilson gestured for Rivera to sit. "What's happened?" "One of our soldiers, Private Jackson, was arrested about an hour ago. His wife just called the base." Rivera handed Wilson a notepad with details. "Apparently he was jogging in the Oak Ridge Heights neighborhood and was stopped by police. Things escalated, and now he's being held at the downtown precinct." Wilson felt his jaw tighten. Oak Ridge Heights, the same neighborhood where he'd had his run-in with Officer Mercer. "What's he charged with?" Wilson asked. "Resisting arrest and disorderly conduct, sir. His wife says he was just out for a run before reporting for duty." Wilson stood, decision made. "Get the car, Lieutenant. We're going to the police station." The drive into town was quiet, Wilson staring out the window as familiar thoughts rolled through his mind. 23 years in uniform, and still this happened to him, to his soldiers, to people who looked like them across the country. The police station was a brick building with an American flag hanging limply in the still afternoon air. Wilson straightened his uniform before entering, his commander's insignia clearly visible on his chest. Inside, the front desk was staffed by a young officer who looked up with mild interest as they entered. His eyes widened slightly at Wilson's uniform. "I'm Colonel Wilson, commander of Fort Harrison," Wilson said, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone used to being obeyed. "One of my soldiers was brought in earlier today, Private Michael Jackson. I'm here to find out why and to secure his release." The desk officer seemed unsure how to respond. "Sir, I'll need to get the arresting officer. Please wait a moment." As the young officer disappeared through a door, Wilson and Rivera stood waiting in the lobby. Through a window into the main office area, Wilson could see several officers at desks. One of them looked up and did a double take upon seeing Wilson's uniform. He leaned over to say something to a colleague. Minutes passed before the door opened again and a familiar figure appeared, Officer James Mercer. Recognition flashed in his eyes when he saw Wilson, followed quickly by something like defiance. "Colonel," Mercer said stiffly, not extending his hand. "I understand you're here about the Jackson arrest." "That's correct," Wilson replied evenly. "I'd like to know the circumstances, and I expect to leave with Private Jackson." Mercer's jaw worked beneath his skin. "He was stopped for questioning in a residential neighborhood where we've had several break-ins. He became combative and refused to comply with lawful orders." "Was he running?" Wilson asked. "Yes, but in running clothes? With earbuds in? On the sidewalk?" Mercer's face hardened. He matched the description of a suspect we're looking for. Wilson nodded slowly, understanding perfectly what that meant. "I'd like to see him now." "He's being processed," Mercer said. "It'll be a few more hours before on Officer Mercer." Wilson cut in, his voice calm but with steel beneath it. "Private Jackson is due on base for duty in less than an hour. Every minute he spends here affects military readiness. I'm sure neither of us wants to explain to our superiors how local police detention interfered with national security operations." A new voice entered the conversation. "What seems to be the problem here?" Wilson turned to see an older man with captain's bars on his uniform approaching. His nameplate read Reynolds. "Captain Reynolds," Wilson said, offering his hand. "I'm Colonel Thomas Wilson, new commander at Fort Harrison. One of my soldiers is being held here, and I'd like to understand why." Reynolds shook Wilson's hand, his expression cautious but respectful. "I wasn't aware we had military personnel in custody." "Officer Mercer, explain." Mercer shifted uncomfortably. "The suspect didn't identify himself as military when stopped, sir." "Did he have a chance to?" Wilson asked pointedly. Captain Reynolds sensed the tension. "Let's take this to my office." He gestured toward a door at the back of the room. "Officer Mercer, have someone bring the detainee to interview room 2. In Reynolds's office, Wilson remained standing despite the captain's offer of a chair. "Captain, this is the second incident in a week involving your officers and either military personnel or myself in the Oak Ridge Heights neighborhood. I'm concerned about a pattern." Reynolds frowned. "Second incident? I wasn't aware of a previous one." Wilson briefly described his encounter with Mercer days earlier. As he spoke, Reynolds' expression darkened. "That wasn't reported," Reynolds said, glancing at Mercer. "It was a misunderstanding," Mercer said stiffly. "No arrest was made." "A misunderstanding," Wilson repeated, the words hanging in the air. "And today's incident with Private Jackson? Another misunderstanding?" Before Mercer could respond, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Private Jackson, escorted by another officer. The young soldier looked relieved to see Wilson, but also nervous. His running clothes were rumpled, and Wilson could see marks on his wrists from handcuffs. "Private," Wilson said, his voice gentler. "Are you all right?" "Yes, sir," Jackson said, standing at attention despite his civilian clothes. "Tell me what happened," Wilson said. Jackson kept his eyes forward, speaking clearly as he'd been trained. "I was jogging on Oak Street around 1400 hours, sir. Officer Mercer pulled up beside me and ordered me to stop. When I did, he asked what I was doing in the neighborhood. I explained I was just running and my route takes me through there 3 times a week. He asked for ID, but I only had my phone and key with me while running. When I tried to explain that I could show him my military ID on base, he told me to put my hands behind my back." Wilson noticed Mercer shifting his weight, eyes fixed on the floor. "Continue," Wilson said. "I asked why I was being detained, sir. The officer said I matched the description of a burglary suspect. When I tried to explain again that I run that route regularly and could prove who I am, he pushed me against the car. I instinctively stiffened. He took that as resistance and forced me to the ground. Then he called for backup and I was brought here." Captain Reynolds had been taking notes. Now he looked up at Mercer. "Is this accurate?" Mercer's face had reddened. He was uncooperative and in a neighborhood where he couldn't explain his presence. "He was jogging," Wilson said quietly. "In broad daylight. On a public street." Reynolds put down his pen. "Officer Mercer, wait outside, please." After Mercer left, Reynolds sighed heavily. "Colonel Wilson, I apologize for this situation. We'll be releasing Private Jackson immediately, and I'll make sure all charges are dropped." Wilson nodded. "I appreciate that, Captain. But this isn't just about today." "I understand." Reynolds rubbed his forehead. "Mercer has had similar complaints before. Nothing that resulted in formal discipline, but enough to concern me. I'll be looking into both incidents thoroughly." Private Jackson was released minutes later. His belongings returned. Wilson walked with him and Rivera to their car, feeling the eyes of officers watching through the station windows. "Thank you for coming, sir," Jackson said once they were outside. "I wasn't sure what to do." "You're a soldier under my command," Wilson said simply. "Your welfare is my responsibility." He paused. "Has this happened before during your runs?" Jackson hesitated. "I've been stopped twice before, sir. Different officers just asking what I was doing in the neighborhood. Nothing like today." Wilson nodded, processing this information. "Lieutenant Rivera will drive you back to base. Take the rest of the day off and report for duty tomorrow morning." "Sir, I can still make my shift today. I don't need special—" "That's an order, Private," Wilson said firmly but kindly. "You've had a difficult afternoon. Rest and be ready for tomorrow." As Rivera and Jackson drove away, Wilson remained standing in the police station parking lot. He had planned to return to base but now found himself walking toward downtown instead, needing time to think. The town of Harrison was small but growing. Built around the military base that employed nearly half its population, Main Street featured small businesses with fresh paint and well-kept sidewalks. People nodded to Wilson as he passed, some offering respectful greetings at the sight of his uniform. He stopped at a coffee shop, ordering a black coffee and taking it to a table near the window. From there he could see the town square with its gazebo and statue of the town's namesake, General William Harrison. Wilson sipped his coffee, thinking about what had just happened, what had happened to him days earlier, and what Jackson had said about being stopped before. Not isolated incidents, but a pattern. The bell over the coffee shop door jingled, and Wilson looked up to see Captain Reynolds enter. The police captain ordered at the counter, then approached Wilson's table. "Mind if I join you?" Reynolds asked. Wilson gestured to the empty chair across from him. Reynolds sat, placing his coffee on the table between them. "I thought you'd be heading back to base," Reynolds said. "I needed to clear my head," Wilson replied. "Walking helps me think," Reynolds nodded. "I wanted to continue our conversation away from the station. About Officer Mercer and the larger issues. I'm listening." Reynolds turned his coffee cup slowly between his palms. "Mercer isn't a bad officer in many ways. Good instincts, follows procedure, works hard, but he has blind spots he won't acknowledge." "Those blind spots hurt innocent people," Wilson said. "Yes," Reynolds agreed. "They do," he sighed. "Harrison is changing. The base is growing, bringing in people from all over the country. Some of our officers are still policing like it's the same small town it was 20 years ago." Wilson leaned forward slightly. "Captain, I have 300 soldiers under my command. Many of them live off base in this town. Many of them are black or brown. I need to know they'll be treated fairly and respectfully by your department." "I want that too," Reynolds said, "but changing attitudes takes time. My soldiers don't have the luxury of waiting for attitudes to change. Neither do I." Wilson's voice remained calm but firm. "What happened today can't happen again." Reynolds studied Wilson for a moment. "What are you suggesting?" "A formal meeting between police leadership and base command. New protocols for interactions with military personnel. Joint training on bias recognition. Community forums where citizens and officers can speak openly." Wilson paused. "And accountability for officers who demonstrate a pattern of discriminatory behavior." "That's a tall order," Reynolds said. "It is," Wilson agreed. "But necessary." Reynolds considered this, then nodded slowly. "I'll speak with the chief. We should be able to arrange a meeting next week." "Good." Wilson finished his coffee. "And Officer Mercer?" "He'll be on administrative duty pending review of both incidents. Beyond that I can't say yet." Wilson stood, extending his hand. "Fair enough. I appreciate your willingness to address this, Captain." As they shook hands, Reynolds said, "For what it's worth, Colonel, I'm glad you're the new base commander. Harrison needs someone like you right now." Wilson walked back to the base rather than calling for a car, using the 3 miles to organize his thoughts. The confrontation at the police station had been necessary but was only the beginning. Real change would require more than just addressing individual incidents. As he approached the main gate of Fort Harrison, the guards snapped to attention, saluting crisply. Wilson returned their salutes, struck by the contrast. Here his uniform and rank granted him immediate respect and authority. Outside the gate in civilian clothes, he was just another black man to be viewed with suspicion. In his office, Wilson found several messages waiting: base operations reports, housing requests, and a call from the mayor's office. News traveled fast in small towns. He called the mayor back first. "Colonel Wilson." Mayor Thompson's voice came through the speaker. "I understand there was an incident with one of your soldiers today." "There was," Wilson confirmed. "It's been resolved for now, but it raises concerns that need addressing." Of course, the mayor said quickly. "I'd like to meet with you, perhaps tomorrow. We're very proud of our relationship with the base and want all military personnel to feel welcome in Harrison." "I appreciate that. Mayor, tomorrow works for me." After finishing his calls, Wilson pulled out a notebook and began writing. Plans for community outreach, policy reviews, training initiatives. The confrontation with Mercer and the police department had been unpleasant but necessary. Now came the harder part, turning that confrontation into lasting change. Wilson picked up the photo of his mother from his desk. She had raised him alone after his father died in combat, teaching him to stand up for what was right while also choosing his battles wisely. "Make things better than you found them," she always said. He placed the photo back on his desk and continued writing his plans well into the evening. This town would be his home for the next 3 years. He intended to make it better than he found it, for himself, for Private Jackson, and for everyone who had ever been judged by the color of their skin, rather than the content of their character. The confrontation at the police station was over, but the real work was just beginning. 1 week after the incident with Private Jackson, Colonel Thomas Wilson stood at his office window, watching soldiers march across the parade ground. His meeting with Mayor Thompson had gone well enough. Lots of promises about community relations and working together, but Wilson had been in the military long enough to recognize when someone was simply saying what they thought he wanted to. Here his phone buzzed. It was Lieutenant Rivera. "Sir, there's been another incident in town. Officer Mercer again." Wilson felt his stomach tighten. "Who?" "No one from the base this time. A black high school teacher. He was pulled over and things got heated. It's all over social media already." Wilson sighed. "Where's Captain Reynolds in all this?" "I thought Mercer was on administrative duty." "He was supposed to be, sir. I don't have all the details yet. Find out what you can. And set up that community forum we discussed. It's time to bring these issues into the open." After hanging up, Wilson checked his watch. He had a house viewing in an hour. Not in Oak Ridge Heights this time, but in a mixed neighborhood closer to downtown. His phone buzzed again with a text from his realtor confirming their appointment. Wilson changed into civilian clothes, khakis and a polo shirt, and headed out. He decided to walk into town rather than drive, enjoying the mild weather and the chance to clear his head. The base was only a mile from the edge of Harrison, and the walk took him through quiet streets lined with modest homes and small businesses. As he passed a corner store, Wilson noticed a police cruiser parked outside. He kept walking but slowed when he heard a familiar voice. Third time this week. "People are getting nervous." It was Officer Mercer talking to the store owner on the sidewalk. Wilson paused, pretending to check his phone. "It's these new people moving in," the store owner was saying. "Town's changing too fast." "We're keeping an eye on things," Mercer replied. "Just call the station if you see anything suspicious." Wilson continued walking before either man noticed him, but the conversation stayed with him. These new people. The implication was clear, and it made the back of his neck burn. The house he was viewing was a craftsman bungalow on Elm Street with a deep front porch and mature oak trees in the yard. His realtor, Lisa Chen, was waiting on the porch steps. "Colonel Wilson." She greeted him warmly. "I think you're going to like this one. It's got character and it's in a great location. Walking distance to downtown but still quiet." The house tour went well. Wilson could envision his mother in the sunny kitchen, could see himself reading in the study. The neighborhood felt alive. Kids playing in yards, people walking dogs, neighbors chatting across fences. "What do you think?" Lisa asked as they finished the tour. "I like it," Wilson admitted. "It feels right. The market's moving fast," Lisa warned. "If you're interested, we should put in an offer soon." Wilson nodded. "Let's do the paperwork today." They sat at the dining room table, Lisa spreading out forms for Wilson to sign. As they worked, Wilson's phone rang. Lieutenant Rivera again. "Excuse me," Wilson said to Lisa, stepping onto the porch to take the call. "What's happened?" "Sir, there's a situation developing downtown," Rivera said, his voice tense. "Officer Mercer has arrested a civilian who claims to know you." "A Mr. Devin Taylor?" Wilson frowned. The name was familiar. "Tall guy, glasses, drives a silver Lexus?" "That sounds right, sir. He's at the police station now." "I met him at the Chamber of Commerce dinner last week," Wilson said. "He owns several businesses downtown." "What was he arrested for?" "Allegedly resisting arrest and assaulting an officer. But witnesses are saying Taylor didn't do anything wrong. It started as a parking violation." Wilson looked at his watch. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Call Captain Reynolds. Make sure he knows what's happening." Ending the call, Wilson returned to the dining room. "Ms. Chen, I apologize, but I have an emergency to deal with. Can we finish this later today?" Lisa quickly gathered the papers. "Of course. I'll have everything ready when you're available." Wilson walked quickly toward downtown, his mind racing. 3 incidents in 2 weeks, all involving Officer Mercer, all targeting black men. A pattern was emerging, and it was uglier than Wilson had initially thought. The police station was buzzing with activity when Wilson arrived. He was still in civilian clothes, and the desk officer didn't recognize him at first. "I'm Colonel Wilson from Fort Harrison," he said. "I understand Mr. Devin Taylor is being held here. I'd like to speak with Captain Reynolds." The desk officer made a call, and minutes later Reynolds appeared looking harried. "Colonel Wilson," he said, lowering his voice, "this isn't a good time." "I understand Devin Taylor has been arrested," Wilson said. "I'd like to know why." Reynolds gestured for Wilson to follow him to a quieter corner of the lobby. Officer Mercer cited him for parking in a loading zone. According to Mercer, Taylor became belligerent and then physically resistant when Mercer tried to write the ticket. And according to Taylor, Reynolds sighed. "Taylor says he was only in the loading zone for a minute, dropping off supplies to his coffee shop. When he came out, Mercer was writing the ticket. Taylor asked if he could just move the car instead, and Mercer refused. The situation escalated from there. Were there witnesses? Several. Most seemed to support Taylor's version. There's also cell phone video circulating online. Wilson raised an eyebrow. I thought Officer Mercer was on administrative duty after the incident with Private Jackson. He was supposed to be, Reynolds admitted. There was a scheduling issue and we were short-handed today. He ran a hand through his hair. Look, this is getting out of hand. The mayor's office has been calling. There are people gathering outside. I'd like to see Taylor, Wilson said firmly. Reynolds hesitated, then nodded. Follow me. They walked through the station to the holding cells in the back. Devin Taylor sat on a bench in a cell, his normally immaculate suit rumpled, a small cut visible on his cheekbone. He looked up when they approached, surprise and then relief crossing his face. Colonel Wilson, he said, standing. I didn't expect to see you here. Mr. Taylor, Wilson acknowledged with a nod. Are you all right? I've been better, Taylor said with a thin smile. This isn't exactly how I plan to spend my afternoon. Wilson turned to Reynolds. I'd like to speak with Mr. Taylor privately. Reynolds unlocked the cell. You can use interview room 1. It's empty right now. In the small interview room, Taylor gingerly touched the cut on his face. Thank you for coming, Colonel. I wasn't sure who to call. What happened? Wilson asked. Taylor took a deep breath. I was dropping off coffee beans at my shop. I own the Daily Grind on Main Street. I double parked in the loading zone for maybe 2 minutes. When I came out, that officer was writing a ticket. I explained I was just making a delivery and offered to move right away, but he wouldn't listen. Officer Mercer, Wilson supplied. Yes, that's him. He seemed, I don't know, like he had something to prove. When I tried to get in my car to move it, he blocked me and said I was interfering with his duties. I asked for his badge number, and that's when he grabbed my arm. Taylor shook his head. Next thing I know, I'm face down on the hood of my own car, being handcuffed in front of my employees and customers. Wilson listened carefully, his face impassive. Has anything like this happened to you before in Harrison? Not to this extent, Taylor said. But yes, I've been pulled over a few times for no apparent reason. Followed in stores. The usual stuff. He gave a humorless laugh. I've lived here all my life. Own 3 businesses. Pay a lot in taxes. Still doesn't matter to some people. Wilson nodded, understanding perfectly. Captain Reynolds says there's video of the incident? My assistant manager started recording when she saw what was happening. So did a few customers. It's probably all over Facebook by now. A knock at the door interrupted them. Reynolds entered, looking even more stressed than before. Colonel, there's a crowd gathering outside, and the mayor just arrived. Wilson stood. Mr. Taylor, I'm going to do what I can to resolve this. Captain Reynolds, what exactly are the charges here? Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer. Assaulting? Taylor started indignantly, but Wilson held up a hand. And the evidence for these charges? Officer Mercer's statement, Reynolds admitted. And a scratch on his arm that he says Taylor caused during the struggle. And the video evidence? Reynolds sighed. I've seen one of the videos. It doesn't support Mercer's version of events. Then I suggest you drop the charges immediately, Wilson said quietly, before the situation escalates further. Reynolds hesitated, then nodded. I need to speak with the chief, but I think that's the right call. As Reynolds left, Taylor slumped in his chair. I still can't believe this happened. In my own town, in front of my own business. Unfortunately, I can believe it, Wilson said. It's happened twice before in the past 2 weeks. Once to me and once to one of my soldiers. Taylor looked up sharply. To you? But you're a colonel. I wasn't in uniform at the time, Wilson said simply. Understanding dawned on Taylor's face. So it's not just me. No, Wilson confirmed. It's not just you. When Reynolds returned 20 minutes later, he brought news that the charges were being dropped. The chief wants to extend his personal apology, Mr. Taylor. You're free to go. Taylor stood, straightening his suit jacket as best he could. I appreciate that. But this isn't over. Outside the station, a crowd of about 30 people had gathered, mostly young, mostly on their phones, some holding hastily made signs reading, Justice for Devin and Fire Officer Mercer. Mayor Thompson was trying unsuccessfully to calm the crowd when Wilson and Taylor emerged from the station. A cheer went up when people saw Taylor. Devin, are you okay? What happened in there? Taylor raised his hands for quiet. The charges have been dropped. I'm fine, he pointed to Wilson. Thanks in large part to Colonel Wilson here. All eyes turned to Wilson, who hadn't planned on being the center of attention. Mayor Thompson quickly moved to his side. Colonel Wilson, thank you for your assistance in resolving this unfortunate situation, the mayor said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Perhaps we could discuss this further in my office? Actually, Mayor, Wilson replied, his voice carrying to the crowd. I think we should discuss it right here. The people of Harrison deserve to know what's happening in their town. A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. The mayor looked uncomfortable but forced a smile. Of course. Transparency is important. Perhaps we could arrange a town hall meeting. I think that's an excellent idea, Wilson said. In fact, Lieutenant Rivera is already organizing a community forum to discuss relations between law enforcement and the citizens they serve. Perhaps we could combine efforts? Put on the spot, the mayor had little choice but to agree. Yes, absolutely. My office will coordinate with yours. As the crowd began to disperse, satisfied that action was being taken, Wilson noticed Officer Mercer standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching. Their eyes met briefly before Mercer turned and walked away. Taylor approached Wilson. Thank you again, Colonel. I don't think I would have been released so quickly without your intervention. I was just in the right place at the right time, Wilson said. No, Taylor disagreed. You chose to get involved when you could have walked away. That matters. He pulled out a business card. If you ever need anything, coffee, a meal, a friendly face in town, my businesses are open to you. Wilson accepted the card with a nod. Actually, there is something. I'm organizing that community forum Lieutenant Rivera mentioned. Having a respected local business owner involved would add weight to the proceedings. Taylor smiled. Count me in. And I can provide the venue. My restaurant has a private room that would be perfect. As they exchanged contact information, Wilson's phone buzzed with a message from Lisa Chen. Still want to make an offer on the house today? Wilson looked around at the town square, at the people now talking in small groups, at Taylor beside him already making plans for the community forum. Yes, there were problems here, serious ones that needed addressing, but there was also potential for change. Yes, he typed back to Lisa, I'm ready to make this place home. That evening, after finalizing the paperwork on the house and returning to base, Wilson sat in his office reviewing the day's events. The arrest of Devin Taylor had been unjust, but it had also created an opportunity, bringing community tensions into the open where they could be addressed. His phone rang. Captain Reynolds. Colonel, I wanted to update you on the situation with Officer Mercer, Reynolds said without preamble. He's been placed on unpaid leave pending a full investigation of all 3 incidents. The chief is taking this very seriously now. Good, Wilson said. That's a start. But it can't end there. I know, Reynolds agreed. The department needs to change. The question is how? Wilson thought for a moment. By acknowledging the problem openly. By listening to the community. By holding officers accountable. And by training them better. Those are big changes, Reynolds said. They won't happen overnight. No, Wilson agreed. But they need to start now. After hanging up, Wilson opened his laptop and began drafting a proposal for the community forum. It would be the first step in a longer process, bringing police, military personnel, and local citizens together to have honest conversations about race, bias, and justice in Harrison. As he worked late into the night, Wilson thought about the house he'd just agreed to buy. It would be his first real home after decades of military housing, a place for his mother to live out her years in comfort. A place where he could put down roots. But first, he needed to make sure it was a town where everyone could feel safe and respected, regardless of the color of their skin or the uniform they wore. The arrest of Devin Taylor had been unjust. But perhaps some good could come from it after all. The community forum was scheduled for Friday evening at the Riverside, Devin Taylor's upscale restaurant overlooking the town's small river. In the 3 days since Taylor's arrest, tension in Harrison had continued to build. Local news had picked up the story, and social media was buzzing with video clips of the incident. Colonel Thomas Wilson arrived early to help set up. The restaurant's private room had been arranged with chairs in a circle, rather than the traditional rows facing a podium, Wilson's idea to encourage conversation rather than speeches. Expecting a full house? Wilson asked as Taylor directed staff to add more chairs. More than full, Taylor replied. We've had twice as many RSVPs as we have space. I've set up speakers so people in the main dining room can listen in. Wilson nodded, pleased but also concerned. A larger crowd meant more potential for things to get heated. Have you heard anything from the police department? Who's representing them? Captain Reynolds confirmed he'll be here. Chief Bennett, too. Taylor straightened a chair. No word on whether Officer Mercer was invited. He wasn't, Wilson said. This isn't about putting him on trial. It's about addressing larger issues. By 6:30, the room was packed. Wilson recognized faces from around town. Business owners, teachers, parents from the local schools. Private Jackson sat with several other soldiers from the base. Captain Reynolds and Police Chief Bennett had arrived together, both in uniform, and sat somewhat stiffly in their chairs. Mayor Thompson bustled in just before 7, shaking hands and patting shoulders as he made his way to the seat Wilson had saved for him. Quite a turnout. Colonel, the mayor said, his practiced smile not quite reaching his eyes. Let's hope we can keep things civil. Wilson stepped to the center of the circle as conversations died down. He wore his dress uniform, the ribbons and insignia reflecting his years of service. Good evening, he began. Thank you all for coming. My name is Colonel Thomas Wilson, commander of Fort Harrison. I've been in town for just 3 weeks, but in that time, I've witnessed and experienced concerning interactions between law enforcement and citizens, particularly citizens of color. A murmur ran through the room. Wilson continued, This forum isn't about placing blame. It's about opening a dialogue, listening to each other and finding a path forward that ensures safety and respect for everyone in Harrison. He introduced the other panelists, Taylor, Mayor Thompson, Chief Bennett, and Captain Reynolds. Then he opened the floor for community members to share their experiences. The stories came pouring out. A high school teacher described being followed around stores. A doctor told of being pulled over 3 times in a month for routine checks. A college student recounted being questioned while waiting for a bus. One by one, Black and brown residents of Harrison shared experiences that echoed Wilson's own. Chief Bennett listened, his face increasingly troubled. When the last speaker finished, he cleared his throat. I want to thank everyone for their honesty tonight, he said. I've been chief for 15 years, and I believed I knew this department inside and out. Clearly, I've missed something important. He looked around the room. I'm not going to make excuses. These stories are disturbing, and they represent a failure of leadership. My leadership. A surprised silence fell over the room. No one had expected the chief to take such direct responsibility. The investigation into Officer Mercer's conduct is ongoing. Bennett continued. But I think we need to look beyond a single officer to examine our departmental culture and training. He turned to Wilson. Colonel, I understand the military has implemented some effective bias recognition and prevention programs. I'd like to learn more about those. Wilson nodded. We'd be happy to share our resources and experiences. The meeting continued for over 2 hours, with community members offering suggestions and police leadership taking notes. By the end, a community oversight committee had been proposed, along with new training requirements and a commitment to regular public forums like this one. As the crowd began to disperse, Mayor Thompson pulled Wilson aside. Well done, Colonel, he said, still wearing his public smile. You've certainly made an impression in your short time here. Thank you, Mayor, but this was a community effort, Wilson replied. The important thing now is to ensure that tonight's words lead to meaningful action. Of course, Thompson said, lowering his voice. Though between us, I think some of the demands tonight were a bit ambitious, budget constraints, you understand? And we need to consider the morale of our police force. Wilson regarded the mayor steadily. With respect, sir, we need to consider the safety and civil rights of all your citizens. Budget adjustments can be made when priorities shift. The mayor's smile tightened slightly. Yes, well, we'll discuss all that at the next council meeting. Speaking of which, I should mingle before everyone leaves. Good night, Colonel. As Thompson moved away, Chief Bennett approached. Colonel Wilson, do you have a moment? Wilson nodded, and they stepped into a quiet corner of the room. I wanted to speak with you privately, Bennett said, his voice low. About Officer Mercer. What about him? Bennett looked uncomfortable. I've been reviewing his record thoroughly since these incidents came to light. There's something you should know. He hesitated. Mercer has a history of complaints similar to the ones we heard tonight. Nothing that ever led to formal discipline, but a pattern that should have raised red flags years ago. Why are you telling me this? Wilson asked. Because I failed to address it, Bennett admitted. I saw each complaint as an isolated incident, rather than connecting the dots. And because... He paused again. Because Mercer is my wife's nephew. I've known him since he was a kid. I thought I knew what kind of man, what kind of officer he was. Wilson absorbed this information silently. I'm not making excuses, Bennett continued. Just explaining why I might have had a blind spot. But that ends now. He straightened his shoulders. Tomorrow morning I'm announcing an external review of our department's practices, focusing on potential bias in stops, searches, and arrests. That's a significant step, Wilson acknowledged. It won't be popular with everyone. No, Bennett agreed. It won't, but it's necessary. He extended his hand. Thank you for pushing us to confront this, Colonel. Sometimes it takes an outsider to help us see our own failings clearly. As Wilson shook the chief's hand, his phone buzzed with a text message. He checked it quickly, then looked up with a frown. Is something wrong? Bennett asked. I'm not sure, Wilson replied. It's from Lieutenant Rivera. Apparently, Officer Mercer showed up at the base gate about 20 minutes ago, asking to speak with me. When told I wasn't available, he became agitated. The MPs asked him to leave, and he did, but Rivera thought I should know. Bennett's expression darkened. Mercer knows he's not supposed to have any contact with you during the investigation. I'll handle this. He pulled out his own phone. Where would he go after something like this? You know him better than I do, Wilson pointed out. Bennett nodded grimly. Unfortunately, I do, and I'm concerned about his state of mind right now. After making a quick call, Bennett turned back to Wilson. He's not answering his phone. I've asked dispatch to send a car to his house, but my gut says he won't be there. He hesitated. Colonel, I hate to ask, but where are you staying? Not on base, correct? I've been in temporary housing on base, but I just bought a house in town. The closing is tomorrow. A thought struck Wilson. My realtor mentioned stopping by the house tonight to do a final check before tomorrow's signing. I should warn her. Wilson stepped away to call Lisa Chen. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again with the same result. When he returned to Bennett, the chief was ending another call, his face now etched with worry. Mercer's not at home, and his personal vehicle is gone. His roommate said he left about an hour ago, seemed upset, had been drinking. Wilson felt a chill of premonition. Chief, I think we should check on my realtor. She's at the house I'm buying. 1847 Elm Street. Bennett nodded. I'll have a patrol car meet us there. The drive to Elm Street took less than 10 minutes, but it felt much longer. Bennett drove his unmarked police vehicle with Wilson in the passenger seat, both men tense with unspoken concern. As they turned onto Elm Street, Wilson immediately spotted Lisa Chen's silver car parked in front of his soon-to-be home. Behind it was another vehicle, a dark blue pickup truck. That's Mercer's truck, Bennett said quietly, pulling to the curb a few houses away. Let me call for backup. There's no time, Wilson said, noticing movement on the front porch. Someone's there. In the glow of the porch light, they could see two figures, Lisa Chen and Officer James Mercer. Even from a distance, Wilson could tell the conversation was tense. Lisa kept backing up toward the door while Mercer followed, gesturing emphatically. Stay here, Bennett ordered, but Wilson was already out of the car. As they approached the house, they could hear Mercer's raised voice. No, he's buying this house. I need to speak with him. Officer Mercer, Lisa replied firmly. As I've told you 3 times now, Colonel Wilson isn't here. This is a private showing and you need to leave immediately. You don't understand, Mercer insisted, his words slightly slurred. He's ruining my life, my career. Everything I've worked for gone because of him. That's not true, Wilson called out as he reached the front walkway. Your actions are responsible for your current situation, Officer Mercer. Not mine. Mercer spun around, nearly losing his balance. His uniform was rumpled, his tie loosened. His eyes widened when he saw Wilson, then narrowed when he spotted Chief Bennett approaching behind him. Of course, Mercer said bitterly. You two are working together now. Bennett stepped forward, hands raised in a calming gesture. James, you need to go home. You're on administrative leave. You know you shouldn't be here. Why not? Mercer demanded. I have every right to be here. I've patrolled this neighborhood for 8 years. I've kept it safe. Safe for who? Wilson asked quietly. The question seemed to hit Mercer like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, then straightened, his face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. For everyone, he insisted. I'm a good cop. I follow procedure. I've never had a serious complaint until you came to town. That's not accurate, James, Bennett said, his voice gentle but firm. There have been other complaints. I just didn't pay enough attention to them. That's on me. Mercer shook his head in denial. No, I've always done my job. I've always followed the rules. Following procedures isn't enough if those procedures are applied unequally, Wilson said. When you saw me looking at that house in Oak Ridge Heights, you didn't see a potential homebuyer. You saw a threat. When you saw Private Jackson jogging, you didn't see a soldier staying fit for duty. You saw a suspect. When you saw Mr. Taylor at his own business, you didn't see a respected business owner. You saw someone who needed to be put in his place. Mercer's face contorted. You don't understand what it's like out there. The risks we take every day. I understand risk better than most, Wilson replied evenly. I've led men and women into combat zones where the threat was real and constant. But I never allowed fear to make me forget who I was protecting and why. As Wilson spoke, he noticed Lisa Chen slowly backing away from the porch, phone in hand. Good. She was calling for help. Mercer seemed to deflate suddenly, slumping against the porch railing. It doesn't matter what I say. You've already decided I'm the villain here. No one is calling you a villain, James, Bennett said, taking another step closer. But your actions have hurt people, and there are consequences for that. What about my family? Mercer asked, his voice breaking slightly. My wife, my kids? What am I supposed to tell them when I lose my job? That's entirely up to you, Wilson said. You can tell them that you made mistakes and you're working to do better. Or you can tell them that you're a victim of circumstances beyond your control. One path leads to growth, the other doesn't. Mercer looked at Wilson for a long moment, something shifting in his bloodshot eyes. You really believe that, don't you? That people can change? I have to, Wilson replied simply. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? The sound of approaching sirens broke the tension. Mercer straightened, looking suddenly more sober. I'll go quietly, he said to Bennett. I don't want to make this worse than it already is. Bennett nodded, relief evident on his face. That's a good decision, James. As patrol cars pulled up to the curb, Bennett guided Mercer down the porch steps. Wilson stayed behind, turning to check on Lisa. Are you all right? He asked. She nodded, though her hands were shaking slightly. He showed up right after I got here. At first, I thought he was here officially. He's in uniform. But then I realized something was wrong. She gave Wilson a shaky smile. Some welcome to the neighborhood, huh? I'm sorry you got caught up in this, Wilson said. But thank you for keeping your cool. It made a difficult situation safer for everyone. Outside, Bennett was speaking with the responding officers as they helped Mercer into a patrol car. The chief looked up, catching Wilson's eye, and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Lisa unlocked the front door. Still want to see the house? The inspection report came back clean. Wilson hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I think I need a few minutes of normalcy after all that. Inside, the house was quiet and peaceful, hardwood floors gleaming in the warm light, empty rooms waiting to be filled with furniture and life. Wilson moved from room to room, trying to recapture the feeling he'd had when he first viewed the property. In the kitchen, Lisa handed him the inspection report. Everything looks good. Just a few minor repairs needed, nothing serious. Wilson glanced through the document, but his mind was elsewhere. What happened tonight with Officer Mercer? Does that change how you feel about me buying this house? Lisa looked surprised by the question. Why would it? Because it suggests there might be more conflict ahead. Because my presence here is already causing ripples. Lisa considered this. Colonel Wilson, ripples aren't always a bad thing. Sometimes they're exactly what still waters need. She smiled. Besides, from what I saw tonight, you handled conflict pretty well. Wilson chuckled despite himself. Military training. De-escalation is always preferable to confrontation. Well, it worked, Lisa said. And for what it's worth, I think this town needs more people like you, not fewer. Later that night, back in his temporary quarters on base, Wilson called his mother to update her on the house purchase. The closing is tomorrow, he told her. Everything's on track. You'll be able to move in next month once I get some furniture. That's wonderful, Thomas, his mother said. I can't wait to see it. But you sound tired. Is everything all right? Wilson hesitated. It's been a challenging day. There's a situation in town I've been dealing with. Issues with the local police department. His mother was quiet for a moment. The usual issues? Yes, Wilson admitted. The usual issues. And you're right in the middle of it, aren't you? There was no surprise in her voice, just weary recognition. I didn't go looking for it, Mom. You never do, she said. But you never walk away from it either. That's who you raised me to be. His mother sighed softly. Just be careful, Thomas. Change doesn't come easy and it doesn't come without cost. I know, Wilson said. But sometimes it comes whether we're ready or not. After saying goodnight to his mother, Wilson sat at his desk, reviewing notes from the community forum. The evening had ended in unexpected drama with Mercer, but before that, real progress had been made. Chief Bennett's commitment to an external review was significant. The Community Oversight Committee would provide needed accountability. The training programs Wilson had offered could help reshape the department's approach. It wasn't a complete solution. Those rarely existed in real life. But it was a beginning. And beginnings were powerful things. Wilson opened his laptop and began drafting a formal training proposal for the police department, working late into the night. Tomorrow he would sign the papers for his new home. Tomorrow the real work of building a better Harrison would continue. The revelation of tonight, that change was possible, even in the most resistant hearts, gave him hope that the work ahead, though difficult, would be worthwhile. 6 months had passed since the night officer Mercer showed up drunk at what would become Colonel Thomas Wilson's home. The seasons had changed, summer heat giving way to autumn crispness and then winter's chill. Now the first hints of spring were appearing around Harrison, crocuses pushing through the soil, days growing longer, the town emerging from its winter quiet. Wilson stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the early morning light spill across his backyard. The house had become a true home over the past months. Comfortable furniture filling once empty rooms, his military awards and mementos carefully arranged in the study, and most importantly, his mother settled into the downstairs bedroom suite he'd renovated especially for her. You're up early, his mother said, appearing in the kitchen doorway. At 72, Eleanor Wilson moved more slowly than she once had, but her mind remained sharp and her spirit undiminished. Meeting at the station this morning, Wilson replied, pouring her a cup of coffee. The final report from the External Review Committee is being presented. Eleanor accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. 6 months of meetings and reviews and training sessions. Has it made any difference? It was a fair question, one Wilson had asked himself many times. The night of confrontation with Mercer had marked a turning point, but turning points were only meaningful if they led somewhere better. Yes, he said after a moment. I think it has. There's still work to do, but I've seen real change. And Officer Mercer? What became of him? Wilson sipped his coffee. He resigned from the force about a month after that night. Last I heard, he's working security at a warehouse outside of town and... Wilson hesitated. He's in therapy. Chief Bennett mentioned it when we spoke last week. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. By choice? Apparently, Wilson shrugged. People can surprise you. After breakfast, Wilson drove to the police station. The town looked different to him now than it had 6 months ago. Not just because he knew its streets and businesses better, but because he saw it through the lens of someone who had chosen to make it home. The police station had changed too. The physical space was largely the same, but there were subtle differences. A new community bulletin board in the lobby, a display about the department's history that now included honest acknowledgement of past failures, and most tellingly, a more diverse group of officers moving through its halls. Chief Bennett greeted Wilson at the door to the conference room. Colonel, glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, Wilson replied, shaking the chief's hand. Inside, about 20 people were gathered, police officers, city officials, and members of the Community Oversight Committee that had formed after the forum. Wilson recognized Devin Taylor among them, now serving as the committee's chairperson. Mayor Thompson sat at the head of the table, looking somewhat less comfortable than he had at previous meetings. The external review hadn't been kind to his administration, highlighting years of ignored warning signs and insufficient oversight. Let's get started, the mayor said as Wilson took his seat. We all have busy schedules. The presentation was delivered by Dr. Lynette Clark, the civil rights attorney who had led the external review. Her team had spent months examining police records, interviewing officers and citizens, and analyzing patterns of enforcement across the town. Our final report contains 27 specific recommendations, Dr. Clark explained, distributing copies around the table. I'm pleased to note that 11 of these have already been implemented over the course of our review, including the revised use of force policy and the new community engagement protocols. She continued, highlighting key findings and remaining areas for improvement. Wilson listened carefully, making occasional notes. When Dr. Clark finished, Mayor Thompson opened the floor for questions and comments. This is all very well-intentioned, said Councilman Porter, a longtime ally of the mayor. But I remain concerned about the fiscal impact of these changes. Body cameras for all officers, additional training, community outreach programs. These things cost money that isn't in our current budget. They do cost money. Devin Taylor agreed from across the table. So does settling lawsuits. So does losing business investment from companies concerned about a town's reputation. So does failing to attract talented people to live and work here because they don't feel safe or welcome. The councilman frowned, but didn't argue the point. Chief Bennett spoke up. My department is committed to implementing all 27 recommendations. We've already restructured our budget to accommodate the highest priorities, and we'll work with the City Council on funding for the rest. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, sometimes becoming heated but remaining productive. Wilson spoke only briefly, offering the continued support of Fort Harrison for training and community engagement efforts. As the meeting wound down, Wilson found himself standing next to Captain Reynolds at the coffee station in the corner of the room. Quite a change from 6 months ago, Reynolds commented, nodding toward the animated discussion still happening at the table. For the better? Wilson asked. Reynolds considered this. Mostly. There's been resistance, of course. Change isn't easy. A few officers resigned rather than adapt to the new policies. But the ones who stayed, he shrugged. I think they're better officers now. I know I am. Wilson nodded, understanding exactly what Reynolds meant. The past 6 months had changed him too. Deepened his commitment to the town. Broadened his understanding of what leadership required in civilian contexts. After the meeting, Wilson walked downtown rather than driving directly back to base. It was a pleasant spring morning, and he wanted time to process what he'd heard. As he passed the daily grind, Devin Taylor's coffee shop, the owner himself emerged and fell into step beside him. Colonel Wilson, Taylor greeted him. I didn't get a chance to speak with you at the meeting. What did you think of the final report? Thorough, Wilson replied, and promising if the recommendations are fully implemented. They walked in silence for a moment before Taylor spoke again. You know, when all this started, I didn't expect much to come of it. We've had incidents before, promises of change before, but this time feels different. Why is that, do you think? Wilson asked. Taylor considered the question. Partly timing. The national conversation about policing created pressure for change. Partly leadership. Chief Bennett surprised a lot of people by embracing the process instead of resisting it. But mostly, he glanced at Wilson, mostly because you refused to let it be swept under the rug. You had the position and authority to make people listen and you used it. Wilson shook his head. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. No, Taylor disagreed. You chose to act when you could have looked the other way. Many would have, especially being new in town. They reached the town square where workers were setting up for the spring festival that weekend. Banners hung from lampposts and vendors were marking out spaces for their booths. Will you be at the festival? Taylor asked. Yes, Fort Harrison has a booth. And my mother wouldn't miss it. She's been looking forward to it for weeks. Taylor smiled. I'll make sure to introduce myself. From what you've said about her, she sounds like a remarkable woman. She is, Wilson agreed. She taught me everything important, including not to stand by when something is wrong. As they parted ways, Wilson continued his walk, eventually finding himself on Maple Drive in Oak Ridge Heights, the street where he'd first encountered Officer Mercer 6 months earlier. The for sale sign was long gone from the colonial house he'd been viewing that day, replaced by children's bicycles in the driveway and flowering plants along the walkway. Wilson paused, looking at the house that might have been his home in another version of events. It was beautiful, certainly, but as he thought about his own house on Elm Street, with its deep front porch where he and his mother sat on warm evenings, its proximity to downtown where he'd become a familiar face at local businesses, its location in a neighborhood diverse in age, race, and background. He knew he'd ended up exactly where he belonged. His phone buzzed with a text message from Lieutenant Rivera. Reminder, community baseball game this weekend. Base versus town, you still pitching? Wilson smiled and texted back. Wouldn't miss it. The community baseball game had been his idea, a friendly competition between Fort Harrison personnel and town residents, designed to strengthen connections outside of formal settings. What had started as a one-time event was now becoming a seasonal tradition. As Wilson walked back toward his car, he passed the elementary school just as classes were letting out. Children streamed from the building, their voices filling the air. Among them, he spotted a familiar face, Officer Diane Rodriguez, one of the department's newest recruits, speaking with a group of children as part of the revamped community outreach program. Rodriguez noticed Wilson and waved. He changed direction to join her. "Colonel Wilson," she greeted him. "Just finished our safety presentation for Miss Chen's third-grade class." "Officer Rodriguez," he nodded. "How did it go?" She grinned. "Great, the kids had lots of questions. And they loved the stickers." She held up a sheet of police badge stickers, though I think they were more excited about the fire truck that's coming tomorrow. Wilson chuckled. Hard to compete with a fire truck. Rodriguez had been hired as part of the department's renewed diversity recruitment efforts. A former military police officer with a degree in criminal justice, she represented the kind of change the external review had recommended, not just diversity for its own sake, but qualified officers who brought new perspectives to the force. "I heard the final report was presented today," she said, her expression growing more serious. "How was it received?" "Mixed," Wilson admitted, "but mostly positive. The hard work is just beginning, though." Rodriguez nodded. "That's what Chief Bennett told us at roll call this morning. That the report isn't the end of the process, it's a roadmap for ongoing change." "He's right," Wilson said, impressed by Bennett's framing. The chief had come a long way from the defensive posture he'd adopted in their early interactions. Later that afternoon, Wilson returned to base for his regular duties, reviewing operations reports and personnel matters. As base commander, his responsibilities extended far beyond the issues in town, but he'd found ways to integrate the two worlds rather than keeping them separate. Fort Harrison had become more engaged with the surrounding community in the past 6 months, hosting open houses, participating in local events, and creating a military-civilian liaison committee to address issues affecting both populations. The changes had improved morale among soldiers living off base and strengthened the town's economic ties to the installation. As Wilson finished his paperwork for the day, a knock came at his office door. "Enter," he called. Private Michael Jackson, now promoted to specialist, stepped into the office and stood at attention. "Sir, the materials for Saturday's baseball game have arrived. The team wanted to know if you'd like to see the uniforms." "At ease, specialist. And yes, I'd like to see them." Jackson relaxed slightly and placed a box on Wilson's desk. Inside were navy blue baseball jerseys with Fort Harrison embroidered across the chest in gold letters. "They look good," Wilson said, holding one up. "The team approved the design?" "Yes, sir. Everyone's excited for the game." Jackson hesitated. "Sir, if I may?" "Go ahead, specialist," Wilson encouraged. Jackson shifted his weight slightly. "I wanted to thank you, sir. Not just for organizing the baseball team, but for everything you've done since coming to Harrison." He paused. "That day when you came to the police station for me, it meant a lot. And what's happened since then, the changes in town, it's made a difference. For all of us living off base." Wilson studied the young soldier for a moment. "No thanks necessary, Jackson. It's what any commander should do." "Maybe, sir, but not all would." Jackson straightened again. "Anyway, I should get these uniforms to the rest of the team. Practice at 1700? I'll be there," Wilson confirmed. After Jackson left, Wilson sat back in his chair, turning one of the baseball jerseys over in his hands. He hadn't expected thanks, hadn't done any of it for recognition. But Jackson's words reminded him that leadership wasn't just about grand initiatives or policy changes. Sometimes it was simply about showing up when it mattered. The weekend arrived with perfect spring weather for the baseball game. The town park filled with spectators, military families, local residents. even a small contingent of police officers wearing custom T-shirts that read, "Harrison PD, we protect. We serve, we can't hit curveballs." Wilson spotted his mother in the bleachers, chatting animatedly with Lisa Chen, who had become a regular visitor to their home since helping with the purchase. Nearby sat Devin Taylor and his family, along with Chief Bennett and his wife. As Wilson warmed up his pitching arm, he noticed a solitary figure standing at the edge of the crowd, James Mercer. The former officer wasn't wearing a police uniform anymore, just jeans and a Harrison High School baseball cap. He seemed uncertain, like someone who wasn't sure they belonged. Wilson handed the ball to Specialist Jackson. "Take over the warm-up for a minute, would you?" He walked across the field toward Mercer, who tensed visibly as Wilson approached. "Didn't expect to see you here," Wilson said, keeping his tone neutral. Mercer shrugged uncomfortably. "My son's playing in the Little League game after yours. Thought I'd come early, see how things have changed." He hesitated. "I can leave if it's a problem," Wilson shook his head. "It's a public park, and the game is for everyone in the community." An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Mercer spoke again. "I've been wanting to say something to you for a while now." He took a deep breath. "I was wrong about a lot of things. The way I approached my job, the assumptions I made." He trailed off, then forced himself to continue. "I'm sorry for what happened at your house that night, and before that in Oak Ridge Heights." Wilson hadn't expected an apology, certainly not here and now. He studied Mercer's face, seeing not the angry, defensive officer from 6 months ago, but a man who looked like he'd done some difficult reflection. "Apology accepted," Wilson said simply. Mercer nodded, relief visible in his expression. "I should let you get back to your team." He turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think what's happening in the department now, the changes, they're good. Overdue, probably. That means something coming from you," Wilson acknowledged. As Mercer walked away, Chief Bennett approached, having observed the exchange from a distance. "Everything all right?" Bennett asked. "Yes," Wilson replied. "I think it is." The game itself was competitive but friendly, with the town team ultimately prevailing 7-5 after a late-inning rally. As players and spectators mingled afterward, sharing food from the community potluck tables set up nearby, Wilson found himself surrounded by the town he had come to call home. His mother joined him, linking her arm through his. "You've done good work here, Thomas," she said quietly. Wilson looked around at the diverse gathering, soldiers and civilians, police officers and local residents, people of all backgrounds sharing a sunny spring afternoon together. It wasn't perfect harmony. There were still issues to resolve, policies to implement, minds to change. But it was progress. Real, tangible progress. "It wasn't just me," he told his mother. "It took everyone willing to acknowledge problems and work toward solutions." "True," she agreed. "But sometimes it takes one person to start the ball rolling." She squeezed his arm affectionately. "I'm proud of you." As the afternoon wound down, Wilson found himself standing with Chief Bennett and Devin Taylor near the baseball diamond, watching a group of children playing an impromptu game of their own. "The External Review Committee wants to use Harrison as a case study," Bennett informed them. "An example of how a department can transform itself when there's commitment from leadership in the community." "We're not there yet," Taylor cautioned. "There's still work to do. Always will be," Wilson agreed. "But that doesn't mean we can't acknowledge how far we've come." Among the children playing baseball, Wilson recognized Officer Rodriguez's son playing alongside, Mercer's boy, neither child aware of or concerned with the complicated history between the adults in their lives. "That's the real measure of success," Wilson said, nodding toward the children. "The next generation growing up in a community that's better than the one we inherited." Later that evening, as the sun set over Harrison, Wilson sat on his front porch with his mother, enjoying the peaceful end to a fulfilling day. Neighbors walked by, waving or stopping to chat briefly. From somewhere down the street came the sound of music and laughter, another gathering continuing into the evening. "You know," his mother said as they rocked gently in the porch swing, "when you told me you were buying a house here, I was worried. After what happened with that officer, I thought you might be setting yourself up for more trouble." Wilson smiled. "You never said anything. You're a grown man. You make your own decisions," she patted his hand. Besides, I raised you to face problems, not run from them. That you did, Wilson agreed. And now look, she continued. You've made this place home. Really home. Wilson looked out at the street where he lived, at the mix of houses old and new, at the families of different backgrounds building their lives side by side, at the town that had initially greeted him with suspicion, but had grown to accept and even embrace the changes he helped bring about. Yes, he said, home. The confrontation that had begun 6 months ago with a racist police officer and an innocent black man had transformed into something neither could have anticipated. A catalyst for change that rippled outward, touching lives throughout the community. There would be more challenges ahead, more difficult conversations, more work to ensure that progress continued rather than stalled. But sitting on his porch as darkness fell, Colonel Thomas Wilson felt something he hadn't expected to find when he first arrived in Harrison. Hope. Not blind optimism that ignored reality, but the grounded hope that came from seeing real change take root and grow. It was enough. For tonight, for this moment, it was more than enough.